So welcome to our fourth installation, our fourth session in studying the White Sail. We're going to be continuing this chapter, the third chapter, cleaning deviations. And I guess you could say this chapter, or this section of the chapter, deals a bit more with the particular to the path. You could say the initial discussions that we've had were a bit more about general assumptions around the nature of the path as seen from the outside, and this is a bit more assumptions around the path seen from the inside. Mind you, the first one we're going to be dealing with, historicity, is obviously also deals with, you could say, the academic way of analyzing the teaching. But one thing, and I might have said it before, but that just occurred to me would be helpful to just include here, is the notion of something that's quite particular for Vajrayana, and it's what we call the pramana of pure view. As you're all familiar with, in Buddhism we operate a lot with a certain rationality, empiricism, logic. We don't believe unless we can actually assert something, either directly or through inference. And it's only after that that we would draw on the authenticity of, say, the Buddha. So in that sense, there is a lot of what appeals to us, this sense that we can understand and know what it is that we're doing with the path. But we also do come across a lot of references to what is beyond our scope. But it's important to appreciate that, for example, the references to the countless Buddha fields that are to be found in every speck of dust, or Buddha nature, previous lives, and so forth, all the things that are not the scope of an ordinary individual's perception. They are the scope of unconfused, undiluted subjectivity. It's the scope of direct perception by someone who knows. So in the Nyingma tradition, we refer to this as the pramana of pure perception. In some of the other traditions, you will see references to the pramana of the yogic pramana. But either way, it's important to just keep that in mind, that these things, things that are what we call hidden. We talk about objects that can be directly seen, and then we can infer them, seeing directly fire, inferring fire through smoke. But there are also things that are hidden, such as previous lives and so forth. But nevertheless, they're not based on metaphysical assumptions or belief. They're just the scope of seeing by a less diluted subjectivity. All right. I'll get down to the actual text now. So, to fixate on historicity and exclude non-historical sublime beings is to remain within ordinary delusion. We should be careful with labeling narratives of liberation as mythology. There are stories of lives reflecting wisdom, these are stories of lives reflecting wisdom, the scope of, you could say, undiluted subjectivity, or awake individuals, not ordinary individuals. It's not the scope of ordinary mind. So basically, like I was referring to before. So if we, for example, look at the life story of Padmasambhava or great saints like Virupa or Tilopa and so forth, then it's very often, if we come with just the optics of classical Western academia, then we only focus on the perceptible data. This entirely misses the possibility of what you could say the scope of the life and liberation of sublime individuals is all about, which is namely what is subtle, which is inexpressible, and the expression of enlightenment. And if we do that, if we just sort of say, well, we think that we don't know much, but we can, we can understand that, possibly somebody lived by this name and so on, then we're not really ever going to go beyond the ordinary narrowness of delusion. And that approach to these narratives excludes the perspective of enlightenment that is beyond delusion. So then also some would see discrepancies in these various narratives, and they would perhaps speculate that such persons had never existed, and so forth. And we can see that even the life of the Buddha is described differently in the Buddhist traditions, and it has a lot more to do with the differences in the individuals and their particular faculties and intentions than actually there being some discrepancies in the data. So we can see we need to approach this within a, you could say, scientific frame of mind, but also understanding that our particular scientific methodology that we have in our culture at this time is not, you could say, it's not unique, and it's also not like the summit of all ways of approaching it, especially if we are approaching the idea of the intangible, insubstantial nature of wisdom. Then there's a completely different dimension that applies. So when we think of the Buddha, well, in general, when we're approaching sublime beings, then we don't think of them as just situated in historicity as per this date and that date. For example, in the Samadhi Raj Sutra, we have here reference to what in the Buddhist traditions is referred to as Buddha Anusmriti, and this we also have in the practices such as Guru Yoga, and in general the invoking of lineage. And there it applies that the teacher, the sublime person, and so forth is not constructed as something that existed at a different, or rather is not really seen as being alien to us. And so in that we think of the Buddha, or rather here it says, for whoever thinks of Buddha, Buddha is sitting in front of him, always bestowing blessings and removing all obscurations. So this implies that the Buddha is not outside, not external, and that of course is the nature of the whole path. So as Rinpoche says, in order to open one's wisdom mind, Buddhas must be recognized as sublime. Our own mind is sublime, and these lives reflect the immeasurable Buddha emanations that again point to this nature. And also Rinpoche, he says, it's essential to focus on with whenever we come across this, that we, sure, we could, well, I'll say that on my account, sure. It's fine to have initial analysis and critical thinking, but there's also a place where encountering these life stories, that it's part of our practice actually, and there should be some sense of appreciating qualities and cultivating faith. There's a point where you could say all the doubt becomes a bit redundant. Buddhas cannot be seen through preconceptions. Buddha manifests according to the students. There are countless Buddhas. So Buddhas are not limited to some particular forms. We have already presently gotten quite far in the discussion about enlightenment as it manifests infinitely in various ways. So we don't see Buddha just being one person. This actually refers to some of the deviations we find in some of the traditions that insist on, there was only one Buddha and so on and so forth. And these kind of narrow preconceptions about reality, they will imprison us ultimately in a narrow nihilistic view, denying us what Rinpoche calls the glory of victorious omniscience. We're still clinging on to reference points. So on the path then, enlightenment has manifested in many different ways. Buddha has manifested as a monk in the perception of some. In the case of King Indrabhuti, he manifests as Guya, the mandala of Guya Samaj, or as Vajradhara to others. And also if we look at Padmasambhava's life, then he also manifested in various ways, yogis, scholars, Heruka, monk, and so forth. And also the Mahasiddhas manifested in various forms. And so we have also, in terms of such manifestations, we speak about the 84 Mahasiddhas, or the 1,002 Buddhas. But these are really just particular, limited ways of describing particular enlightened individuals at particular time. The 84 Mahasiddhas, they're just the 84 great siddhas that got together for a feast one time in Bodh Gaya. The 1,002 Buddhas that we speak of in this fortunate eon, that's just the Buddhas that came together, prayed and vowed. But these are just two instances. And so we want to understand that when we speak about Buddhas, we're talking about infinite, countless ways that enlightenment manifests throughout our universe. And as far as what we call supreme Nirmanakaya Buddhas like Shakyamuni Buddha, they're also infinite. So Buddhas are reflections of those to be taught and trained. Such Nirmanakaya Buddhas are inseparable from the Dharmakaya. Like the beings to be taught, Buddhas have varying forms. So the first and the last reflect the same thing, that the manifestations of Buddhas merely appear in a particular way depending on those that are to be trained. Now, Buddhas are not caught by karma. They transcend the conceptual constructs of time and place and history and so on. And they are also, you could say, not about themselves. They are there exclusively out of love, out of compassion, and with the wisdom to guide others to freedom. So we cannot say that the historical Buddha existed within the confines merely of the ordinary perceptions of some people at that time, that he was a citizen of such and such a country. The Buddha was a Nirmanakaya Buddha, a manifestation of enlightenment, and as such we also say that the Buddha was non-deluded. He's inseparable from the Dharmakaya Buddha, the Dharmakaya principle. So sentient beings, they have various forms. So according to their needs, then of course Buddhas manifest in according to their needs also. So we don't want to reduce the Buddha to a particular conception or some sort of cultural aspect. The Buddha should be understood completely in a limitless way here. So that's a little bit about some of the ways that the Buddhas could be misconstrued. Now we need to take into account the qualities of this, the mind that we're discussing here. Enlightenment, as manifest in Buddhas, is beyond our present scope. Yet we recognize the key role our consciousness has in all our experience. So there are infinite manifestations of phenomena, and likewise also there's infinite manifestations of enlightenment according to these phenomena. You could say according to the different dispositions there are, different dispositions of sentient beings. So all these forms cannot be imagined by our consciousness, which has a particular limited outlook, which has been obscured for lifetimes. It's just like someone who has always lived in the dark, trying to imagine things that has never been perceived. At the same time, we know from our human experience that consciousness is the source of everything we perceive. Wherever we go, it's our consciousness that is not just passively observing things, but very much constructing the flavor of whatever we perceive. So this is indicative of the primary nature of the mind. And so we have this quote from Saraha: "The sole essential nature of mind is the source of all phenomena. Wherever existence and enlightenment manifest, the fruit of whatever is wished is given. I bow to mind, which is the wish-fulfilling jewel." And let me just at this point, Gosh, if I may, if you have the opportunity to read the Psalms, the dohas, actually we call them, the sort of spontaneous Vajra songs of Saraha, they are extraordinary. Treat yourself to that. Anyway, in this way, we need to understand the unlimited role, rather the unlimited nature of the enlightened mind, and also the mind in general. And then there's, having realized then nature of reality and then displaying in various ways, we also have corresponding different teachings. And here it applies that we cannot judge the numerous aspects of the Buddhist teachings or the different ways Buddhas manifest. This goes against both the causal and the resultant vehicle. Such ordinary conceptions will veil Buddha nature. So this is a deviation that happens both outside of Buddhism, also within Buddhism, particularly the idea of the closed canon and so forth, which is limiting the outlook. Of course, you could say you can understand how these kind of views can come about. But at this point, we'd like to set the bar a bit higher and realize that we'd be limiting ourselves unless we see through these kind of deviations. It's impossible for anyone to agree on what's agreeable, what's pleasant and unpleasant, and also nobody can really agree on what is the holy, which God is sacred. So we can see even in the ordinary world, there is nobody agrees. And in Buddhism, we have many different teachings according to different individuals and many different ways that the Buddha is manifest. So we shouldn't object that there are other paths in which we have other approaches. So we shouldn't fall into these limited attitudes. Rinpoche says, instead of using the limited, substantial logic of the habit of worldly reality to argue against particular aspects of Buddhas, we had better let Buddha nature self-manifest. The imposition of negative conceptions only further obscure one's own Buddha nature, which has already been dormant for many lives. So we are delaying our journey if we get caught up in a particular kind of, it's not only skeptical, but it's skepticism for its own sake. So it's this particular cynical approach that very often is just part of our makeup. It's partially comes from culture, but it's also a habitual pattern that we need to address and get rid of. So rejecting the variety of enlightened manifestations is something that's contrary both to the general Mahayana and also the particular resultant vehicle, the mantra Vajrayana. It's really essential to liberate this Buddha nature in us, and Rinpoche says we need to, rather than practice through letting our Buddha nature, and this is what we're continually, you could say, touching on through the various forms of both study and practice. We should then, as he says, let it illuminate appearance freely with faith through pure phenomena. And what Rinpoche means here is that we should discontinue this habit of delusion and we can do this through the insight that we gain through studying the teachings, reflecting on it, meditating, and then gaining confidence in the abiding reality of our Buddha nature. And this again is something that we sustain, integrating all of our various tangible and intangible conceptions then with wisdom. So if we only stay with our habitual thoughts and continually grasp at our particular self-image and also our image of the outer perceived world, then even we're staying around a sublime being, then he or she will appear as somebody ordinary. So we need to be aware of where it is we're limiting ourselves. We're doing ourselves a big disfavor. Various Nyamanakayas manifest according to the various needs. There are various styles of such Nyamanakayas. In the nature of wisdom, all Buddhas and deities are equal. So again, if we expect the Buddha to appear in a particular way, this overlooks the nature of the wisdom teacher's three kayas, in which the Nyamanakaya then is something that manifests according to different needs of beings. So you could very much be drawn to individuals that are incredibly capable in the world, and you only want to associate with lamas who can drink beer and who can who are very clever with the ways of the world. And then to say, oh, this monk, this person who lives in a monastery couldn't possibly teach anything worthwhile to me, because what that monk has in this monastery is only a sheltered existence, and it's not relative to the dynamics of the world. And that's again, that's completely misunderstanding the nature of wisdom. And likewise also then some might be very upset if they see a teacher who drinks beer or who's not ordained and so forth. So we limit ourselves with these kinds of expectations. And we want to appreciate whether beings are living in caves or they're living in where? In Sydney or London or Taipei or India or Bhutan. And in general, the whole nature of wisdom is such that it's the equal throughout all Buddhas. In Vajrayana then we refer to Buddhas as deities, but all of these are equal. A very important point. So just to say finally something about the unlimited nature of the way that enlightenment manifests, we need to understand all sentient beings have Buddha nature, and all sentient beings can attain enlightenment. Buddha is not some person, it's the principle that permeates the universe, our reality. It's the most basic ingredient or substratum or foundation of our being. It is the ground of perfect awakening. And unobscured immaterial light appearance with the quality of limitless positive wisdom energy. So this is how we should understand our ground nature. So all sentient beings, obviously they have to awake, they need to awake, but they have the potential, if you like. We can see this depending on how we're approaching this. From the Mahayana, we say potential. In Vajrayana, we say this is how they actually are. But not exclusive to only some who think alike, then Buddha is beyond the narrow conceptions of just one or a few people. Buddha is not a material aggregation. When we say Buddha, we're referring to something, to enlightenment. And it is this unobscured immaterial light appearance with the qualities of limitless positive wisdom energy. And that then is the meaning of what we call Buddhas, deities, sublime beings. Now, we've several times come across this, and we'll come back to it again and again, the idea of kayas. The 3 kayas particularly, but sometimes we talk about 4 kayas, sometimes 5 kayas, it differs, but these are just systems really. And we could say that when we talk about the 3 kayas, it's a bit like saying, okay, the sun. We can describe it in terms of its heat, we can describe it in terms of its light, we can describe it in terms of it being a particular orb, size, weight, all of that. So there's no disagreement between saying the sun is hot and that it's bright, or that it's an orb in the space. So when we talk about the 3 kayas, we're just talking about different dimensions of enlightenment. Buddha or deity are merely conventions depending on the particular vehicle. And actually here you have on page 53, what is it, paragraph 4, 5, you have very precise then definitions. And then it applies that we as practitioners should not be partial to any one Buddha or deity. So this is surprisingly rampant, but obviously it doesn't make sense. So the Dhammakaya is the wisdom of, you could say, fully awakened Buddhahood, non-delusion. The Sambhogakaya and Nirmanakaya, they're ways that this enlightenment manifests to others. You could say spills out towards the other. And these are then but these are ways in which they manifest enlightenment. So this is important to understand that that hence they're not something different. The Dalai Lama, the Khyentse Rinpoches, the great masters and so forth, they are embodiments of this 3 kaya principle. And that goes for all Buddhas, deities, and so forth. And it really just depends on the language of the particular yana that they are used, that different languages are used. So you could say in the general Mahayana, we refer to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and in the Vajrayana, we talk more about deity. But the idea of beginning to then be partial to some is again something that obscures our understanding, obscures enlightenment. All deities and Buddhas are contained within each other, as they are one in the space of all the Buddha's reality, what we call Dhamma Dhatu, the basic space of phenomena. And all Buddhas manifest within this. So the various ways that we represent then enlightenment, the 3 kayas and so forth, differ, but they're all, say, unified. The 3 kayas, for example, are complete in Buddha Shakyamuni. All Buddhas are complete in any Buddha, even though the qualities of enlightenment, they're perceived differently. These differences are merely then reflections of the differences in sentient beings, as we saw before. So I actually uploaded a section on the Buddha Samantabhadra in the reading folder, and it might actually be helpful to have a look at that. So this is really just a way to understand how enlightenment is present as the primordial principle. There's different ways then that the different yanas see enlightenment, but if we, for example, see the Buddha Shakyamuni, we shouldn't think that Buddha Shakyamuni is not Vajrayogini or is not Vajrakilaya, and so on and so forth. It's important that we don't get sort of narrow-minded and think that these are not all one. You could say Vajrakilaya embodies a particular quality of enlightenment, of the Buddha's wisdom, and Vajrayogini, and so forth. So we should really not have any fixation on these appearances, and also the sort of the style that enlightenment might manifest. There's actually, this is not in the text, but I just thought there is this famous quote from the Diamond Sutra, where the Buddha says, if one seeks me in form, if one seeks me in sound, one practices a deviant way and cannot see the Tathagata. So even though we conventionally say, well, this is the Dalai Lama, this is Charlie Rinpoche, this is Chogyam Trungpa, and so on, that's understandable, and we'd be possibly be silly to not do that. But at the same time, as students and practitioners, it's important to understand that that is not, the teacher is beyond that. And so also we understand the teacher is beyond coming and going. So again, visualizing the Buddha, all Buddhas are contained therein. When enlightenment is attained, there is no more the seed of Buddha nature, only fully awake Buddha. Likewise, in the Vajrayana, the co-emergent wisdom deity becomes fully manifest wisdom deity. So these are just different ways in the different yanas, again, the language we use. But again, before we embark on the path, and in the later chapters, we're going to look at the senses, the next one, then karma, and some more practical aspects of the path. But it's so important that some of these basic misunderstandings are actually attended to, and they're not always discussed. So when we evoke the presence or visualize Padmasambhava, we should recall that there is no contradiction between Padmasambhava and all Buddhas. This applies for the sublime masters like Saraha, Longchenpa, Jigme Lingpa, our root teacher, and so forth. Buddha nature can be seen as the seed of enlightenment, but when enlightenment is attained, the seed is no more there. We know that from just our ordinary conventional seeds. And likewise also in the Vajrayana, their Buddha nature is referred to as the inherently born or co-emergent wisdom deity. And so, although presently obscured, the deity resides within this ordinary mind, nowhere else. And those who cultivate this are called yogis and yoginis. When they attain enlightenment, there's not even the name of deity or ordinary mind. There is only wisdom. And that is, again, synonymous with enlightenment. Okay, let's see if there's any questions. Someone's asking if possible to write down the chants just mentioned. Yeah, maybe I should give a little reading list, I guess, at the end or something. Recommended reading in this regard. Things we've touched on. Okay, I'll do that. Is that what you meant? Yeah, I was referring to Saraha's songs. There are there's a few collections of translations, and yeah, Saraha's songs have been translated a few times. Yeah. Okay. Shall do. Everybody okay? Everybody out there? I'm just sitting here alone in a room with my sleeping dog. So but I have all of you out there, virtual friends. It's nice to know. So, mind you, I don't mind the company of my dog. He's a delightful fellow. Okay. So, leaving Buddha nature as latent potential, we wander in samsara, stuck with our victim attitude. Yet enlightenment manifests at all, everywhere, and at all times. You probably should say at all times. Yeah. The thing is, there's some urgency here. We're discussing this nature of enlightenment and so forth. And the point with all the teaching is that we need to do it. And as we know, but we also tend to forget, if you are as superficial as I am, then time is running out. And Rinpoche discusses what happens if we don't cultivate this path and we don't arrive at this goal. Then we wander in confusion. We go up and down like a bee trapped in a jar. We're driven by our dualistic propensities, and we we harm both ourselves and others. Our ego becomes more solid, becomes more heavy, substantial, and it obscures enlightenment. Unless we cultivate and strengthen this recognition of inherent deity, or wisdom, or prajna, or compassion, whatever we call it, through recognition and practice, there is always the evil of dualism. There's always this demon, this Mara of us versus other. So if we don't look into this condition and we remain ignorant about the source of our delusion, then yes, then sometimes it seems like the evil comes from the outside. Once we practice the path, we become aware of how much it's our dualistic fixation and habits that creates all our trouble. And particularly if we become Vajrayana practitioners, this purity that we are invoking, if we don't properly attend to that, it's as if it rises up against us. And we have this scenario with you could say, the notion that the wisdom sort of almost punishes us. There's some sense of things could go wrong if we begin to practice deceit. Somebody who has been very pure, very committed to the path, and somehow is thick-headed and strays into serious self-deceit could very well have an accident, could very well have something that shakes them and wakes them up. So that's where you could say there is this sense of the universe being with us, but also sometimes there's a certain element of tough love. So enlightenment, and this of course is where we, in Vajrayana, particularly in Tibetan Buddhism, there's a lot of wrathful, there's iconography, there's wrathful sadhana and so forth, and from the outside that might look very strange. But we need to understand, of course, that the nature of enlightenment is not some bland, what is it, Casper milk toast? I think some pale, friendly, negotiating, endlessly patient quality, but sometimes it's very appropriate if there's some wrath that moves things. So enlightenment might appear in wrathful manifestations of subjugation. The path subjugates ignorance and delusion with the weapon of prajna. There is a certain there's a certain discourse of battle, of confrontation with confusion, the image of Mara and so forth. So it's clearly with the path we are killing something. We're killing delusion. There's something that has robbed us of our life, held us back, and has created misery for countless beings, and this needs to be annihilated. So there is very often in the path the idea of wrathful manifestations. But when we do that, and the wrath that we encounter then in these tantric sadhanas and iconography, they obviously have nothing to do with anger or aggression. There's no duality. There is the warmth of wisdom that permeates such, you could say, assertive, sharp expression of enlightenment. Wrath is a natural quality of wisdom, and in its pure form, it's not directed at, or rather it's not some subject that is aggressive or directing itself at an external object. Wisdom in itself manifests without the duality of subjugator and subjugated. But as long as there's confusion, then there is, you could say, the need for wisdom to get to the root of what causes the confusion that leads to suffering. Rinpoche gives the example of a magic show in which the magician displays sort of horrific scenarios, but actually nobody's harmed. We all have been witness to, you know, what is it, the lady that gets sawed, gets put in a box and sawed over, and so on, you know, swords stuck into people that are sitting in a box, and so on, right? So all of this looks frightening, but we also suspect that there's not really anything seriously dangerous happening. So the bottom line really is that the entire Buddhist path is about eliminating confusion and realizing innate enlightenment. So there is something that needs to be subjugated, and what does it is insight. It's the weapon of prajna. So the innate peaceful wrath of actual reality guards against delusion. This nature manifests as peaceful and wrathful wisdom deities to guide beings. Alienated sentient beings are trapped in patterns of attachment and aversion. So we understand that wrath subdues the cause of harm, and within the natural wrath of the Dharmakaya manifests the peaceful and wrathful deities. Natural wrath of the Dharmakaya means non-delusion. It doesn't allow an inch of delusion to sneak in. It's ultimately wrathful. So we understand the nature of the Dharmakaya. We can say it's extremely wrathful. It doesn't allow any delusion. We also say it's extremely peaceful because all the sort of the serenity of non-delusion gives rise to the love of caring for all sentient beings, and so on. So it's not as if Dharmakaya is limited. Again, this sort of idea of just bland peace. It manifests the entire array of what we call the peaceful and wrathful deities. And these are manifestations that then are there manifesting as the wealth of the Dharmakaya and the wisdom that's enabled to adapt according to the disposition of different beings. So this subjugation, though, has to be done by the individual. So it's the individual wisdom that recognizes anger, and it's the individual wisdom that then subjugates anger through positive non-dual wrath. For example, if we read in some of the Vajrayana liturgies, then we'll, for example, see lines like Vajra wrath cuts or pierces the ordinary aggression. So that's the well, the nature of sentient beings is that they are basically alienated from their own peaceful and wrathful qualities. These qualities manifest then continually, but are not perceived clearly. We say in the bardo, after a moment of death, then what we had to call the bardo, the dharmata, of actual reality manifests. And there the entire array of our various qualities, psychological qualities, manifest in their pure form. There again, it's about recognizing these. But generally, sentient beings, then they miss this point, and instead then they project desirable and undesirable qualities onto the subject and object, and on the basis of that we have attachment and aversion, the foundation of the kleshas. And when we have these kleshas, they can be anything very subtle, and they can be also extremely raging and violent, and they can even go as far as wishing to hurt others. So with recognition of that pattern that sentient beings get stuck in, then enlightened activity may be wrathful. We have in the sutras even the image of the Bodhisattva in a previous life who took out somebody who was potentially someone who was going to assassinate a large number of people. And so this imagery of killing in tantric iconography, then it reflects this enlightenment activity, and it ultimately also reflects the liberation of delusion. So the thing is, the objective of all paths, all meditation, and regardless of what tradition it is to see through the web of deceptive thought conceptions. So seeing through that is then, you could say, the weapon of prajna that kills conceptions. It's not suppressing, it's not ignoring them, but it's to getting at them, to them at the root, and to see their non-existence, that they have actually never truly existed. I think it's in Myth of Freedom that Trungpa Rinpoche says the nature of enlightenment is simply to step out of self-deception. And self-deception refers to that there's something that never actually was there. It's a deception. It's just not true. But that kind of killing needs to take place. And sometimes we're so dense that there has to be some shaking going on. So we have to admit to killing what is killing reality. We're killing the delusion that prevents us from experiencing reality. So this kind of wrathful activity is essential to awaken to enlightenment. And this, of course, applies all the way through in the case of tantric sadhana, tantric iconography, and tantric culture in general, where we have, the imagery of skull cups that are brimming with blood, wearing hides of slain beings, and so forth. All of this refers to then various ways of celebrating this victory and the killing of delusion. So we also would say the yogis dance on the slain corpse of the grasping mind. They annihilate dualistic fixation. So we say the slain gods of eternalism are not external entities that are slain with hatred. It means the constructs of ego have been seen for what they are, and they are rendered inoperative. So you come across the laughter of the Dakinis, Kandugejan from Jigmelimpa, and the opening liturgy, and Rinpoche quotes then in his translation, I, a yogi, performing fearless activity by sustaining the understanding of the pervasive equanimity of samsara and nirvana, dance on the supernatural gods of evil of grasping mind, and annihilate the devil of dualistic grasping into ashes. So we have a lot of that. So that's, you could say, one way of bringing wrath or aggression onto the path, transmuting it, seeing it for what it is. Then there's similarly also conversely, the nature of union, which then also sometimes is, or often, generally, is again misunderstood, misinterpreted, another kind of deviation. So union, or yabyo, is ultimately the image of non-duality's bliss. Some object to images of union, but without union we would not be here. So the image of this yabyo, it might elicit some misunderstanding that comes from moralistic judgments. You can read some of the early missionaries' comments when they visited Tibet. Then again, this kind of morality is again based on rigid, narrow ideas of what is moralistic, and it very often is that kind of rigidity that breeds immorality. In the tantric tradition, the union that we see, the yabyo, signifies that which is beyond grasping, namely then the unity of bliss and emptiness. This is where bliss is not grasped, but is recognized as being insubstantial, cannot be objectified. And so there you have the male that would symbolize bliss, And the female, which has nothing to do with gender, is the space that is recognized as that cannot be objectified, and that we then refer to as emptiness. So we talk about the unity of appearance and emptiness. And this is the nature of reality. And recognizing this is blissful. So hence the imagery has to be the sexual image, the greatest bliss that we could experience. Rinpoche says the main meaning of union is indivisible emptiness and exaltation, and the sign of this is the mudra of female and male deity united. This nature that is, you could say, implied is innate to our own mind, and this nature might be manifesting as female or male wisdom deity in union, depending then on the faculty of the practitioner. So there's different ways of symbolizing this, again, depending on who it is. But union refers to the meeting of any two. It's everywhere in our ordinary experience. It's basic to all paths. So it's union when someone is united with God, and if someone is opposed to the union of wisdom deities, one should have been opposed to the union that we find everywhere in the universe, meaning the practice of male and females conceiving. So the notion of immorality, the objection to union, is basic to the narrow human mind, and it's not, it doesn't reflect the nature of wisdom deities. The compassion, and this is more sort of in general in terms of, you could say, understanding the nature of enlightenment as something that can be understood as in terms of reference points or higher, lower, and so on. Of course, it's beyond that. The compassion of the Buddhas is non-referential, without duality, and hence also without hierarchy. Such references are basic to the ground and path, but not to enlightenment. We in the sort of the whole generation that rejected authority was very much about, you could say, deconstruction and taking down the ideas of hierarchy. And so that's valid, and we understand that there's no up and down. You could say the idea of the great Buddha, the idea of the teacher on the throne, these are references that we need at the time of understanding confusion as opposed to delusion, and also at the time of the path. But enlightenment, you can see the actual nature itself does not have any hierarchy. So, but it's common that people think enlightenment entails some hierarchical notion that some are enlightened and others aren't. And these dualistic conceptions, they are ultimately absent. And yet you have Buddhas that engage with sentient beings, and doing that skillfully, what they display are these qualities of being free from credentials, being free from reference points, and their quality and nature of compassion is non-dual. So this display of being free from this action that is not tainted by subject and object, this is the expression of enlightenment. But these reference points that we have then, putting the Buddhas on the shrine or honoring great teachers and so forth, they're part of the ground and the path. Yet in reality and in the results, such reference points are completely absent. So as such, we have Buddha nature during the ground and path, but it's purified at the time of the result, as we have seen. So we would say Buddha nature is understood as the seed that's not the fully manifest Buddha. So that's what we generally, how we understand Buddha nature in the Mahayana. We see in the sutras where the Buddha said, when the bud of the complete wisdom body of Buddha has not opened because of temporary stains, it is called Buddha nature. And also Nagarjuna, he speaks about how water appears different depending on the season. And so there are conditions where the Buddha nature eventually becomes Buddha. So we have some, you could say, relative and absolute perspectives or ultimate perspectives on this. When we say attaining non-duality, that's path language. Someone attains non-duality, and you'd say enlightenment, even at the ground, is without such notions. Nature, you'd say the ultimate reality, innate reality, is without such notions. So to awake or not is our choice. We will not be forced into it. So enlightenment is not something other. When we speak of overcoming duality, attaining non-duality, there's no notion of a special non-dual state that we don't have now that happens there. At the time of the enlightenment, there's no object apart from the subject. There's no differentiation in any way. So this, of course, doesn't mean the Buddha would not distinguish between phenomena and not be aware of the individual situations of all sentient beings. But we're just saying that the nature of non-duality is intrinsic to us, and at the time of then having gone through the path and attaining non-duality, we're really just uncovering the basic ground. So when we refer to this the fruition of enlightenment, we also refer to it in terms of the three kinds. When one is awake, then there's no longer any impure perceptions. All phenomena are seen as purity. And this, of course, is also what is the scope then of the Vajrayana practice. All phenomena are seen as actual deity, as actual Buddha. But to integrate what we're saying here is, yes, that's how reality is, but we don't see that reality. It's up to us to awake. So to awake or not to awake, that's our choice. Rinpoche says whether one wants to make one's own phenomena into dualistic habit or the enlightened appearance of wisdom deity is not decided outwardly. It is one's own choice. So whether we're going to be stuck with our habitual outlook or we're going to take a hard look at how reality actually is and then integrate this through the path, that's not something that we're just forced into, like we're forced into primary school and so forth. This is entirely our choice. This is where we need to be proactive. So we're talking free will here. Wisdom deity manifests from within and is untainted by ordinary mind. Yet this cognitive dysfunction of our ordinary mind needs to be addressed. The unified state of Vajradhara embraces all phenomena as they are. The space of reality is uncreated, hence it is unceasing. Wisdom deity comes from within. It's not an object or a psychological state that we can perceive. It's something that is the nature of wisdom. It's the qualities of wisdom. And this is something that we perceive with the relinquishing of our habitually dualistic mind. Dualistic mind is a temporary delusion, cognitive dysfunction, if you like. And this is something that emerges out of non-recognition, not looking, not appreciating, not seeing wisdom mind. So, as such, in that dualistic mind is delusion, like we said before, it's a deception. It doesn't really exist. But enlightenment is contingent on not being deluded by this dysfunction. And enlightenment is, as far as we're concerned, is contingent on us recognizing it. So Thinley Norbu describes this as it's not made by anyone, not coming from anywhere. It's not just something that manifests from time to time. Sorry, not only manifesting from time to time, but always unconditional without intention. End of quote. So here there's no ordinary phenomena. That is what we call the unified state of Vajradhara Yuga Nada. So unified state is just an expression, but this means enlightenment. And that the quality of that wisdom space is not something that has been created, and it's not something that's that can come undone. It's simply just not, it's the nature of reality. And as such, it's indestructible. And this is why also we speak about Vajrayana in the sense of the Vajra representing this indestructible quality. So if we think about it, then obviously if something's not created, there's nothing to cease. If we think about the nature of our reality, there's nothing about it that has been constructed. If we look, we cannot, all we can see superficial constructions that are dependently arising, but their absence of having any intrinsic reality is this indestructible space of reality, Dhammadhatu. So such space is said to be unconditioned, and it's uncontained, unobstructed, and it belongs then to the nature of enlightenment. So we have different names, but we have one nature. We refer to this pure nature differently according to the various vehicles or yanas. Wisdom deity is self-existing, unconditioned, all-pervasive, and fulfills all purposes. In the outer Tantra vehicle, Kriya Tantra, we refer to wisdom deity in terms of, we refer to as Dharmata, actual reality. In Upatantra, we say space of reality, Dhammadhatu. And in Mahayoga, we refer to this nature as infinite purity, Nansita Paranja. So this nature is something that we refer to in different ways according to the different vehicles. So when we say wisdom deity, mandalas, they're simply ways that we describe what is beyond the scope and logic of ordinary mind. Shantideva also says in the way of the Bodhisattva, the absolute is not the scope of the intellect. So we can't imagine this. This is about the naked practice of the path that enables us to experience this. But this nature then is the scope of the Vajrayana. So we can say wisdom is beyond language, but yet it's something that is palpable. It's experienced by our individual wisdom. So we are continually invited in to encounter and familiarize ourselves with this. So the language we find here in this book reflects this out-of-the-box reality. Thinley Norbu is introducing to us that is not part of what we normally are exposed to as citizens in the modern world. The single nature of non-dual wisdom awareness mind manifests infinite qualities of body, speech, mind, quality, and actions. Realizing this nature, we go beyond all extremes and effortlessly benefit others. So when we encounter the Vajrayana and are empowered in the Vajrayana, the nature of sadhana would emphasize different aspects of the non-dual wisdom. And as such, we find different sadhanas that emphasize these different qualities, body, speech, mind, quality, and action. And whichever practice of sadhana we do, this enables us then to bring our phenomena onto the path skillfully and ultimately to go beyond any phenomena whatsoever. Rinpoche, he says, all the various terms for enlightened dimensions and qualities such as wisdom, deity, all describe the single nature of non-dual wisdom awareness mind, which is the basis for inexpressible pure phenomena. Hence this nature is not like just empty sky, because it is always immeasurable, unobstructed, pure wisdom appearances of light, body, speech, mind, quality and activity, and inconceivable Buddha fields with the flawless qualities of exaltation. So Rinpoche here concludes then the chapter with a quote from Longchenpa, and before that he makes the point about how we at this juncture should take the advantage to follow a sublime teacher and mingle our mind with their wisdom. In this way we could extract ourselves from samsara and capture what we call the stronghold of samantabhadra, going beyond the extremes of eternalism, nihilism. So with the potential that our normal confused mind holds for being liberated within wisdom, we have the possibility that we could achieve the what we call dual purpose of benefiting others as well as ourselves. All of this takes place within the expanse of reality that then Longchenpa he describes. Oneself and others are samantabhadra. Eternalism and nihilism are samantabhadra. In the expanse of samantabhadra, there is no self, other, eternalism, or nihilism. So again, here I would refer to the, I uploaded this, that's a few pages from his own studio, which that describes the nature of samantabhadra. And implicit in samantabhadra's names, which means the universally good, different translations, the all good. Rinpoche also has his own translation of the term samantabhadra, but it refers to this innate disposition, the primordial Buddha, the awake nature of reality. So that lies beyond all the ordinary constructs of confusion. No questions? Really? No questions? You're very welcome. No sleeping dogs, but still okay. All right. Okay. Once again, I apologize for going a little bit over time here. And for the next time, then please read the census. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish, ever more and more. Thank you.